Hello everybody. About a week ago, I woke up about 3 a.m. in the morning and I was having this dream about our Greenacre public school song. It just seemed to come out of nowhere. And the lyrics were coming back to me as I was laying in bed. So I quickly got up and I jotted down the lyrics that I could remember. And then as time went on, more and more of the lyrics came to me. And it was a song that we sang often throughout my primary school years, and it was based on Elvis Presley's Wooden Heart. And what they had done is they just changed the lyrics. So what I thought I'd start off just playing it for you and having a go at trying to sing it for you. I'm not the world's best singer, but I'll just sing the lyrics to you how I remember it. Okay? As through childhood we go, it's with pride that we show, that we love Greenacre School. Oh, we sit on a hill and we work with a will to prepare ourselves for life. Greenacre School will remember you as on our paths we tread. We will think of the friends that we made here at school, and march forward straight and true. Okay, so that some of you might recognise that as Elvis Presley's Wooden Heart song. But if I can go back a bit first, because I want to just talk about Greenacre Public School from my perspective. Basically, from the very outset, my dad was a country boy. He came to Sydney on for a holiday, stayed with his brother. He went on a blind date and he met my mother, who was very much a city girl. And she definitely didn't want to live in the country, and Dad fell in love with her. So they bought a temporary house, they called them temporaries back then, at number 65 Temporary Street in Greenacre. And basically it was like a granny flat with a kitchen, bedroom combined, and shower bathroom kind of setup. And even though my dad wasn't a qualified builder, he bit by bit he started to build the house in front of the old temporary, which was common back then, because back then you didn't need building licenses like we do now and all the regulations and things that we have now. But anyway, to cut a long story short, Dad eventually built the house, and then they married quite late in life. So I came along in 1958, and in 1964 I started kindergarten at Greenacre Public School. Now, the interesting thing is that where we lived in Tempe Street, if we walked out our front gate and crossed the road, we would actually walk into St John Vianney Catholic Primary School. And Mum was Catholic, Dad was Anglican, and interestingly, my grandfather on Mum's side said, "Oh, don't send Harold there because he'll be singing hymns and doing prayers more than he'll be learning." So they decided to send me to Greenacre Public School, which was about maybe 20 minutes walk from our place. And back then I used to walk to school every day, really. There was no buses, or we could get to go there. So basically we'd walk there. And I was very fortunate. I remember the first day that I went to school, Mum took me to the office and I met the headmistress at the time, and her name was Miss Jewis. And she was quite an elderly lady, and had a bit of a reputation for giving naughty kids the feather duster. So literally she would use the cane part of a feather duster to hit the naughty kids. And anyway, she took me along to the classroom, the kindergarten classroom, and Mum said I didn't cry, so that was interesting because I was only a child, so it was all a big adventure that first day. And I was very fortunate to get Miss Ellison as my kindergarten teacher. And the reason why I say fortunate is because she actually could play the piano, because back in those days, I think it was the regulation that most primary teachers, if not all, had to have an ability to play on an instrument. These days they don't. But back then that was the case. They had to be able to play piano. And the kindergarten room that I was placed in had a huge folding door between the classroom next door, the other kindergarten class. And what would happen is maybe the other teacher wasn't as competent as Miss Ellison on the piano. So what would happen is they'd open the sliding doors, the two classes would combine, and we'd sing all sorts of songs. There's a couple I remember, which one was Heidi Ho, which goes something like, Heidi, Heidi Ho, the great big elephant is so slow. Heidi, Heidi Ho, the elephant is so slow. Then there was another one called Jimmy Monkey. When Jimmy Monkey has a swing, he is a sight to see. He twirls around the branch, you see. I can't remember. Swinging up and swinging down, he is a sight to see. When Jimmy Monkey has a swing, it is a sight to see. So we used to, in kindergarten, there was lots of music. We also did a lot of art, I remember. One thing that sticks out is squiggle patterns, where you get a piece of paper and you basically just squiggle all over it, and then basically you colour in the sections of the squiggles. And quite often you get really nice patterns. And the other thing I remember is we used to go out into the playground under a huge gum tree, which is still there, and they had painting easels there with big, like you'd see in Paris, those sort of easels where you do painting. And they used to use egg cartons cut in half, so you had 6 colours, like red, I think it was red, yellow, blue, your primary colours white, black, I'm not sure what the other one was. But we used to do a lot of painting outdoors, and that was fun to do. And another fun thing I remember is in kindergarten, we used to play a game called Cat and Mouse. And the class would form a big circle, and one child would be on the outer circle, one would be on the inside, and somehow or other they had to catch each other. So we had to sort of put our arms up and down to stop the cat from getting into the mouse, so to speak. It was something along those lines. But no, kindergarten was great. We didn't really do much maths or anything like that from what I can remember. Must have been very basic stuff, because back in those days, unlike today, I think only the very wealthy suburbs in Sydney probably had preschools. I don't remember even hearing of any. They may have been around, but they were very rare back then, because most families had mum and dad, and mum usually stayed home and dad went off to work, and that was pretty much what it was like in the 1960s for most people. But anyway, that's probably 1964 and kindergarten taken care of. Then in year 1, I had a teacher called Miss Burney, and she had her room right next door to Miss Stewart's office, which was the building that's now on closest to the corner of Chaseling Street and Waterloo Road. And Miss Stewart's office was at the very front, and then adjoining her room was my classroom where we had Miss Burney. And my mum used to say to me, now make sure you behave yourself when the teacher leaves the classroom, because Miss Stewart's can look through a peephole and see if we're misbehaving. So I was probably pretty compliant in that regard since I was only 7 then, I think. Yeah. Okay. Then the next year 1 was pretty uneventful when I think back. I do remember though that Miss Stewart used to take us for a class in music, and she was quite a ballet music fan, and I remember her playing records in the assembly hall area outside our classrooms of the Tchaikovsky's Nutcracker, the Swan Lake music. She seemed to really have a liking for Tchaikovsky, and maybe she'd been a ballerina when she was younger, but I do remember that very clearly, having those music lessons. There was also a piano there as well, and I think one day I had the opportunity I think they asked, can anyone play the piano? And I did, and Miss Burney was quite impressed. She couldn't believe, because I was playing by ear, I was just playing lots of popular tunes at the time. Then, but that's all I really remember about year 1. It was pretty uneventful. Year 2, we had Miss Percival, And Miss Percival was quite a fashionista. She she wore beautiful clothes. She always wore a hat in the playground. She was very fair. Used to wear lots of makeup. Had beautiful perfumes. I can still remember the perfumes that she used to wear. She was a really lovely lady, and she found out I could play the piano too. So there was actually an old piano in the corridor outside our classroom, and a couple of times she'd get anyone in the class who could play to play the piano. But also, why that was significant for me is the first song I'd ever learned to sing in class was Edelweiss from The Sound of Music, because that year The Sound of Music was really big in Australia. I never saw it until quite a few years later, but the sound, I still remember the film soundtrack sold millions and millions of copies, and the songs were very popular, and Edelweiss was the very first song that we learned to sing as a class, and that was quite significant for me. So all my teachers in infant school, that's year kindergarten, year 1, year 2, they were all wonderful. Then in year 3, back then we had grading classes, unlike today where you have kids, of different abilities all in the same class. So you have your bell-shaped curve, your average number of people are in the middle, then you've got your very clever people and your less clever people. But that was how it was done back then. So when I went into upper primary school, year 3, I had the misfortune, unfortunately, to have a teacher called Miss Gregg. And I don't want to speak ill of, she's passed on, but obviously she was quite impatient with children. Like she would scream. And a mate of mine who was in the building right across the other side of the playground, in the building that actually faces Acacia Avenue, he could actually hear her screaming at kids in the class. And she was quite scary. And she'd always wear black. She always rubbed the chalk from the blackboard on her clothes, so sort of do this sort of thing. I remember she ate lots of salad sandwiches, so she was quite healthy, but she was very sporty. She was into sport, and often we'd be taken out into the playground to play baseball. Interesting, and that was one of the few sports that I really liked. But I think academically, it was just a terrible year, and I think there was a personality clash between her and I, which was unfortunate. But in year 4, 1968, I actually dropped down from 3A to 4C, and I really think she had a lot to do with that. Most of the time I was terrified of her, and she back then they would hit kids with T-squares that were used on the blackboards to draw geometry, things like that. One girl, I remember, she was too scared to ask Miss Gregg to go to the toilet, and I remember seeing all the urine flowing down the aisle. That's just terrible. And another thing I remember is at those days, in particularly this time of year, winter, they used to have these cosy heaters, they call them, KOSI, and they were like about 1 metre high or so, and you'd put wood in them, kindling to start them up. They had like a mica kind of front, and you'd put in tip briquettes or coal into the top to warm up the classrooms, and they really made the rooms very cosy. Nearly every classroom, I think, at the school had those back then. That was 1967. And yes, I think that was also an interesting year, because I think prior to then, the year 3 was sort of separate sex schools, like they had males and females in different classes. But year 3, the class I had, we had a mixture of boys and girls. But one of the other classes my mate was in, there was no girls in that class at all, which is interesting for year 3. So then year 3 was a bit of a disaster for me, but something good always comes out of something bad. So in year 4, that was in 1968, I had the really good fortune to have this teacher called Miss Brownette, and she was fantastic. And we had our half-yearly exams, and I topped the class. And what she did was she would rank everyone on their marks in class for that half-yearly assessment, And then basically the bottom right-hand corner of the classroom, she put myself. Then the girl that came second, Leslie Ryan, she sat next to me. Then going across the aisle, she put the person who come third in the class in terms of academic. And then the fourth, and so on. And then basically the kids that hadn't done as well in the exams as the others would be up the front of the class. So it'd sort of go like from right to left, back, left to right, right to left. Okay, so because basically the format of the classroom then was you had 4 rows of desks. 2 people would sit at each desk, so you'd have 5 rows, I think it was, from front to back. Then you'd have the aisle, then you'd have another row of seating, 5 rows again. Then you'd have an aisle, another row of 5, and then another row. And that's how they used to do it back then. We had no air conditioning, we had no fans, we did have heating, like those same sort of cosy coal heaters that you don't see now, but they were very popular back then. And yes, we must have been pretty tough. The teachers also didn't have any teachers' aides. They basically had to teach everything, with the exception of sewing for the girls, straw basket making for the boys, and we also had a guy called John Freelander who came to the school and taught recorder to the classes in the demountable classrooms that they had. They had 2 demountable classrooms, and of course they were like ice boxes in winter and stinking hot in the summer, and they had no fans or air conditioning, nothing like that, only heating. So we must have been pretty tough, I think. And then also, I remember Miss Brownett used to get us to sing Kookaburra Sits in the Old Gum Tree. That tune, you know, Kookaburra sits on the old gum tree, Mary, Mary, king of the bush is he. Laugh, Kookaburra, laugh, Kookaburra gay, your life must be. Okay, so gay had a very different meaning back then too. But also the year before, going back to Miss Gregg, she used to have a tuning fork, and she bashed the tuning fork on a desk, which was tuned to A, concert pitch A, and then she'd get us to sing that same round. That seemed to be very popular back then. And also, row, row, row your boat gently down the stream, merrily, 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 life is but a dream. So they were very popular with classes. So they'd get one group of the class to start singing, and then a little bit later the next group of people would start singing the same song, and then the next people. So the harmony of the 4 different groups was really effective. And they were the 2 that we seemed to do the most in those year 3, year 4 years. And needless to say, I did really well in the end of year exam for year 4 as well. So I got into 5A again for the following year. So it's interesting that Miss Gregg was definitely not my best, my watershed year, I suppose you'd say. But it just goes to show how much impact a teacher can have on children. Anyway, year 5 was an interesting year because we had Mr. Watts as our teacher in 5A. And he was also the deputy principal at the time. The principal was Mr. Muirhead. He looked after year 3 through to 6. And he was a really nice guy. Mr. Watts was an interesting character because he used to smoke a lot and he'd disappear out of class quite often. And also that year, I think we had about 12 relief teachers because he was so caught up in the admin that a lot of the time he couldn't come to class. So in the end, we had all these replacement teachers. So it was quite a disjointed kind of year. But it was also the year that I got good friends with Milton Church, who was in my same class. And he was a very positive influence too because he got me more studious as well. So, and we used to often walk home from school together and talk about politics and all sorts of things. Had some really good discussions. And then still in year 5, which was 1969, one of the highlights of that year was we all went to the assembly hall And on a little black and white TV set, we all watched the Apollo 11 moon landing in the assembly hall, and that was quite amazing for the time. Interesting, at home, we never even had a TV until I was about 1967. Prior to that, we had mainly radio going. Mum had put the radio on TUE, always on TUE in the morning. All day it'd be on. And back then we had a lot of instrumentals on the radio too. So that kind of always caught my imagination more than the vocal stuff. And there's a whole other story there about how I got sick with the measles in 1964 when I was in kindergarten. And I think the influence of watching my kindergarten teacher playing on the piano, and when she played triads, which is like 3 notes evenly spaced apart, as a child we would sit on the floor and be looking up at the keyboard. So what you'd actually see was the pattern of the triads, like 3 notes, chords like that. And that fascinated me, just watching how she did that. So that there was something going on musically there with me then. And then I got the measles, like I was saying, and I said to Mum and Dad, could they get me a piano? And of course they couldn't afford a piano, but they got me a toy piano. And then we discovered that I could play all the songs I could hear on the radio without music or anything. You just knew where the notes were. So then my dad was talking to a friend's cousin who was down from Newcastle, and he said they had an old piano that his children never used anymore, and he said to my dad that if he could arrange transport, he could give me the piano to work on. So that was quite a significant thing for me. And I snuck into our neighbour who had a trailer, Mr. Ellis, and I asked him if he would be able to go up to Newcastle to bring the piano back for me. And he said basically, I think we better go and talk to your dad. So I was in a bit of trouble because I snuck in there to ask him without them knowing. And anyway, the deal was Dad was to pay for the petrol, and Bruce, the son, and his father, and Mum and Dad and I went up to Newcastle to get this old upright piano. And as they were wheeling it down the path to load it onto the trailer, I was playing the keyboard as the piano was moving along down the pathway. So it was quite an exciting thing to get that piano, I can tell you. And when we got it home, I didn't want to go to bed. I wanted to keep playing, and Mum and Dad were tired after the trip up and back to Newcastle, which was a long trip back in those days. So I had to wait until the next morning to play. Then Mum wanted to clean it, so she took it all apart, and she found the skeleton of a mouse that must have climbed into the bottom of the piano, which they did back in those days, probably still do. It must have got caught in there, died. There was no smell or anything. There was just the bones. You could see the bones of this mouse. So that was interesting. And then in 1968, too, in Year 4, I met a guy called Chris Gorry who was learning off a piano teacher in Napoleon Road, where it intersects or gets close to King George's Road now. And the house is still there. She's long gone, but she was quite a good teacher, but she didn't do exams. She mainly taught folk songs and popular songs and things like that, but that was fine. But I really wanted to do exams, which came later in high school. But anyway, that's another story. But then, okay, so we had the moon landing. I'm jumping around a bit here. 1969 was the moon landing at school. We also had an excursion that year down to a Goulburn sheep farm, I think it was. And the year prior, 1968, our first excursion was actually a coach tour around Bankstown LGA, down Henry Lawson Drive, down the Hume Highway, out Bass Hill Way, and they showed us all the Lansdowne Bridge, for example, all the historic landmarks at the time. We didn't have any excursions prior to that. And then in Year 6, I had Mrs. Murray for my final year at primary school. That was rather uneventful too. Not a lot of things happened in that year. That was 1970. But the year prior, 1969, Mum and Dad bought an above ground pool. It was only 12 foot diameter by 3'6", but we had so much fun in that pool, and a lot of the neighbourhood kids in Tempe Street, we'd get together and swim in the pool and make currents and do all sorts of things. And Dad also built me a billy cart, so that became very popular with like a lot of the kids around where we lived as well. So yeah, that's pretty much the musical development up to the end of primary school. High school's a different story. I might save that for a different time. But with all these things, you think of things afterwards that you should mention. So one of the things, we used to have a lot of sports carnivals at the school, and marching was very popular. Like we used to have to march around the playground, and they used to play a lot of band music, like, you know, Colonel Bogey. And we sort of march around the playground, and on sports carnivals they'd also do that as well. We'd have to march around the playground. And they had these little portable kind of record players, which were high-tech at the time, with one big speaker at the front and a little turntable, and they put the march records on. We'd have to march around the playground. That's another thing we used to do. And what else? That's all that really comes to mind at the moment, but it might just give you a bit of an idea what school was like back then, between 1964 to 1970 for me. Of course, we were very fortunate in 2014, 50 years after we left kindergarten. A group of us linked up through Facebook, and we actually went back to Greenacre School. The principal there was very welcoming, and put on a morning tea for us and let us have a look around all the old classrooms we had and how different they look now to what they did back then. It really was a wonderful experience. So good things do come out of Facebook if it's used the right way, that's for sure. But I hope you found this interesting, and I'll probably think of a lot of other things that I forgot to mention here now, but hopefully that was interesting for you. Thank you. Bye.